Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. Today, we are beginning the exploration of Buckminster Fuller's operating manual for Spaceship Earth. But more importantly, the approach that we always have is a syntopical approach. So what we will be doing is that as we read the book, we will be bringing in many other people's views about the same topic. So for example, we'll be next dealing with systems, and we will we'll bring in many other thinkers on systems to compare and contrast Bucky's ideas with their ideas to get a more rounded picture. That's the syntopical approach. So we'll be doing that throughout. We'll be talking about synergy, and we'll get more people in. We'll be talking about regenerative landscape, and we'll get more people in at each of the levels. So to kind of connect other ideas on the same topic with Bucky's ideas as we go on. So today, the format, we're going to get started. I wanted to get started in a slow and steady way. I wanted to establish, and I think, firstly, I was very pleased with this operating manual because it's just 44 pages. That's great, to have a short, significant book is always my dream, both for writing and reading. And these first two chapters, I think, gets us started in the right way because it shows you kind of the concrete base of his comprehensivist approach to things, or systems approach to thinking and living. The format today is I'm going to talk about the book. So firstly, I would like to know how many of you have read the book. So if you open up the participants window, you have yes and no buttons. So just if you have read this book, at least the first two chapters, say yes, otherwise say no. If you can't do this in participant window, you can do that in chat. And this entire process is going to be quite interactive. So we'll be going back and forth. So the format is as follows. I'm going to present the first two chapters. I'm going to be going through the text, selected parts of the text. And then I have a bunch of panelists, Mike, Sanjay, and Glenn, who will be giving their own takes in about maybe 3 to 5 minutes each. They will give their own take on these two first chapters, first sections. All of this is very short. So if you have not read it, lots of people have read it. Maybe about 10 people, I would say, have read it. So about half the people. Rest of the people, I recommend strongly that you read it after the meetup, because that will help you in the future meetups. This is a series of 4 meetups. Okay, so I'll be taking you through the chapter. So even if you have not read it, I think you will have a pretty good idea of what Bucky is saying. And then you will hear 3 other takes on these 2 sections. Then we will open it up for Q&A, after which we are going to do breakout rooms for about 20 minutes. And then we'll come back to talk about what we are going to do next. And also at that point, when you come back, you get to ask one question, put one question on the table you think is a burning question that needs to be answered. All right, so that's the format. All right, let's get started. So I'm going to go chronologically through these sections, highlighting some key sentences. The first sentence that really caught my attention was, our brains deal exclusively with special case experiences. Only our minds are able to discover the generalized principles operating without exception in each and every special experience case, which, if detected and mastered, will give knowledgeable advantage in all instances. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this brain and mind distinction that he's making. Now, much of what I'm saying is not based on Bucky. It is based on my own understanding of this. This is mostly, it is kind of Daniel Kahneman, Carl Jung, people like that. This is a huge distinction between the brain and the mind. We have an evolutionary past, and we evolved these large brains in our evolutionary context. We operated in a tribe of about 30 close-knit people and maybe 150 loosely knit people. Our brain is amazingly good at dealing with this context without words, with just intuitively, by learning through imitation, things like that. So our brain is amazingly capable. And it is, in Carl Jung's terms, it is the intuitive and the feeling capabilities of the brain that this, what the concept brain here captures. And in Daniel Kahneman's terms, it's the system one. Our system one is very powerful, very capable. It is able to see patterns and act, especially when we are operating in familiar surroundings. So that's the brain. Mind is something completely different. It is the system two of Daniel Kahneman. It is the thinking capability of that psychological function of Carl Jung. It is able to deliberate. It is able to self-correct. It is able to explicate. So firstly, it's implicit versus explicit, implicit with the brain and explicit with the mind. You need the mind in order to plan things over time, over space, over large number of people. Our brains were amazingly good in our evolutionary context, but the moment we go to 5,000 people, let alone 5,000 people in a city, cities like Chetalhoyuk or Mohenjo-daro, because you don't know everybody, our brain alone can't function, can't handle that situation. Fast forward to 8 billion people, you need something more than the brain. And that's the mind. Mind is able to see patterns and identify general principles across time, across space, and across people, which serves as a foundation for action. So that distinction is a core distinction that we will keep coming back to. Second point I want to make is Bucky talks about his own experience of having been trained in the US Naval Academy and practically experienced in the powerfully effective forecasting arts of celestial navigation, pilotage, ballistics, and logistics, and in long-range anticipatory design science. Okay, so this kind of long-range anticipatory design science is really the core of what mind does. That's the function. That's the function of the mind. Third point I want to make is his vision of what man is. He says, nothing seems more prominent about human life than its wanting to understand all and put everything together. I would say all children start with that. But I would say that unfortunately, most adults lose that at some point. We have the capability of doing that, but I think most adults lose it at some point. And a lot of what he talks about actually explains that. And that's something, so this, having that kind of curiosity is something that we are born with, and we lose it at some point. And that's a very big issue. Fourth point I want to make is about the unique nature of man as contrasted with other animals. What nature needed man to be was adaptive in many, if not any direction. Wherefore she gave man a mind as well as a coordinating switchboard brain. Mind apprehends and comprehends the general principles governing flight and deep sea diving, and man puts his wings or lungs or his lungs and then takes them off when not using them. A specialist bird is greatly impeded by its wings when trying to walk, and the fish cannot come out of the sea and walk upon land, for birds and fish are specialists and man is not. So that is a very core point. It's beautifully illustrated in the biological sense. Continuing, it seems obvious why men, unaware that they would someday contrive to fly and penetrate. So firstly, though human beings have that capability, the context in which most human beings operated was very, very narrow. And this is the point he's making. And if the context is narrow and is very familiar, then brain is very, very good at dealing with that. It seems obvious why men, unaware that they would someday contrive to fly and penetrate the ocean in submarines, thought of themselves exclusively as pedestrians, as dry land specialists. Confined to the quarter of Earth's surface, which is dry land, it is easy to see how they came to specialize further as farmers or hunters, or commanded by their leader to become specialized as soldiers. The small isolated groups of humanity were utterly unaware of one another's existence. They were everywhere ignorant of the vast variety of very different environments and resource patterns occurring other than where they dwell. Now, this is a huge point, that these groups of people, now again, look at it purely in even first at the evolutionary context. These tribes of people, they know only about their own tribe and the immediate physical surrounding. Okay, and that's what they focused on, and their brain is very good at dealing with that, and that's all they did. So that's a huge point. He's kind of talking about the connection between brain and specialization on one hand, and mind and comprehensivism on the other hand. If your context, if your entire world is here and now and confined to a very small area and dealing with only small number of people, your brain is quite adequate at dealing with that. So that's a core point. Now, fast forward to the first, what he calls the first comprehensivist. But there were few human beings who gradually, through the process of invention and experiment, built and operated first local and bay, and then alongshore, and then offshore rafts, dugouts, grass boats, and sailing canoes. Finally, they developed voluminous fishing vessels and thereby ventured out to sea for progressively longer periods, developing ever larger and more capable ships. The seafarers eventually were able to remain for months at high sea. Thus, these venturers came to live normally at sea. This led them inevitably into a world-around, swift, fortune-producing enterprise. Thus, they became the first world men. Now, I love the term world men, because what you're doing, firstly, you have to realize that you're leaving the shore, and even the ships, initially all the travel by boats was always you hug the shore and you did not leave it. Again, so imagine, the kind of enterprise, the kind of risk taking, the kind of forethought it requires to leave the ground, safety of the ground, and go into the sea and go further and further distances and figure out a way of doing that. So that's the core part. Okay. The men who were able to establish, I'm going to read this whole paragraph because this really establishes the contrast between somebody who is just fixed in their local context versus somebody who takes the risk to go wider. The men who were able to establish themselves on the oceans had also to be extraordinarily effective with the sword, both upon both land and sea. They had also to have great anticipatory vision, great ship designing capability, and original scientific conceptioning, mathematical skill in navigation and exploration techniques for coping with fog, night, and storm, with the invisible hazards of rocks, shoals, and currents. The great sea venturers had to be able to command all the people in their dry land realm in order to commandeer the adequate metalworking, woodworking, weaving, and other skills necessary to produce their large and complex ships. They had to establish and maintain their authority in order that they themselves and the craftsmen preoccupied in producing the ship be adequately fed by the food-producing hunters and farmers in their realm. Here we see the specialization being greatly amplified under the supreme authority of the comprehensively visionary and brilliantly coordinated venturer. Okay, so this is really fascinating. Let me go ahead, let me continue with this. The sea masters, because if you can understand this concept of who these people are, that's what comprehensivism is really about. Okay, that it's a very concrete way of showing what it takes, what the dangers are, why people do it and why people don't do it. All of it is explained in a very concrete way if you understand just this, who these people were. The sea masters soon found that people in each of the different places they visited knew nothing of the people in other places. The great venturers found the resources of Earth very unevenly distributed and discovered that by bringing together various resources occurring remotely from one another, one complemented the other in producing tools, services, and consumables of high advantage and value. Thus, resources in one place, which previously had seemed to be absolutely worthless, suddenly became highly valued. Enormous wealth was generated by what the sea adventurers could do in the way of integrating resources and distributing the product to the everywhere around the world amazed and eager customers. So these very few masters of water world became incalculably rich and powerful. The great sea venturers thought always in terms of the world because world's waters are continuous and cover 3/4 of the Earth planet. So this is the summary of the first section. We are putting down what these sea venturers were. Okay, I'm going to continue into the second section, which elaborates on this theme. First point I want to make here is human beings throughout the pre-20th century history had seen only about 1/1,000,000th of the surface of their spherical Earth. The limited experience gave humans a locally focused, specialized viewpoint. So this is, again, another way of thinking about this is that this is the distinction between perceptual operation and conceptual operation. The perceptual operation is good at dealing when the context is fixed. But when you go and encounter a completely new people and completely new set of circumstances, you really need to know, you really need to think at a conceptual level of what is it that is common to all human beings, what is it that everybody needs, being able to think. So ability to think is crucial when you are going across cultures, not only in the actual act of being able to go, but having gone there to be able to actually trade with completely new set of people, figure out how to set up, because they have never seen a trader come by, and you have to be able to figure out how to deal with that. It's a very high bar, and that requires conceptual thinking. Okay. Okay. So he says, I call these sea mastering people the great outlaws or the great pirates simply because the arbitrary laws enacted or edicted by men on land could not be extended effectively to control these folks. Now, I do not like this term at all, because this is defining these people who are actually doing something that was not there before in the terms of what was there before. So I don't like, I think for me, the better word is traders. Okay, so I want to take a little detour here. This is actually a very common pattern between, this is the story of traders and farmers. I've seen this in India. I have seen this in place after place. See, farmers are focused on their farm. They know they have the skills that they need to actually grow crop have been passed from generation to generation. They are familiar with it. There is a range of things that can happen, and they have ways of dealing with it. Now, this trader who shows up actually makes nothing. So the farmer looks at him and says, what are you doing? You make nothing. You just got something from somewhere. And I need it very badly, because that would make my farm much better. But it took only that much time, for them to produce it. Why are you charging me this much? So there is a tremendous misunderstanding of traders in the culture. This is true of let's say, the Gujarati community, who are the traders in India. This is very much true of the Jewish community, who have been traders throughout Europe and other places. So the concept of trader is a key concept here. It is basically a trader, a farmer is just focused on here and not just here and now, but they're focused on the familiar. A trader, firstly, is taking enormous amount of risk of travel. Second, is trying to figure out values of things that they have not seen and trying to project what could be a value when you put this together with something else. Okay, so trading, I think, captures this, who these people are better. Next one. The only laws that could rule them and did rule them were natural laws, the physical laws of universe. So this is very interesting. See, they have to really form what are the real laws. They are, a person operating in local surrounding is concerned about the parochial laws, whatever laws happen to be in that particular society. Whereas people who are operating across will say, okay, what remains constant through, and what kind of principles, general principles, do I need to be able to go and trade between any place and any place? So that's the level at which you have to think of laws. Those who stayed on the top of the water prospered and did so because of their comprehensive capability. That is, they were the antithesis of specialist. They had high proficiency in dealing with celestial navigation, the storms, the sea, the men, the ship, economics, biology, geography, history, and science. The wider and more long distance their anticipatory strategy, the more successful they became. Leonardo da Vinci is an outstanding example of the comprehensively anticipatory design scientist. Okay. So this is the contrast, a contrast between somebody who is locally focused. Now, I want to extend it one bit, because what happens is that even when a culture learns something through a use of the mind, our system one, our habits, our culture makes that a part of our automatic functions. So even when, I was talking originally in terms of these isolated tribes in our evolutionary context. But now when you look at the cities, what happens is that initially it takes an act of mind, somebody who's able to look at the whole system and make it work. But once they have made it work, then people come along and they can still say, okay, in order to satisfy this particular subsystem, I can just keep doing this and I can function within this. So there is a lot of operating purely through brain that is possible once somebody has set up systems. And a lot of kind of building of value is about pushing things into the brain and making things automatic. And so that's the core, and that's the big distinction I wanted to put on the table of what is comprehensivist approach, what is, and connecting it with the long range across many people and across time, versus, and contrasting it to us dealing with small number of people across limited space and in a very short range of time. Okay, so that's what I wanted to put on the table. Now I'm going to open it up for Sanjay. So Sanjay, so it'll be Sanjay, then Glenn, and then Mike. Sanjay, what are your thoughts about these two sections?
So yeah, I think that he's laying down a foundation. So first of all, I think that Bucky is really using a parable type of approach here. He's giving us examples. He's giving us a simple way to look at the world, which is actually much more complicated. And he puts down, in very brief 2 chapters, 2 sections, how he sees the world, how we can see the world, and how different people in the world interact, and some are more capable than others in interacting and managing the world and navigating. Sorry for the pun, because he's using maritime examples. So this parable format is, I think, very effective because it helps us to understand and simplify the story. I agree that the world has specialists and comprehensivists, which other people may term as generalists. I think, though, that he is, in some areas, the example that he cites to make the story run well, I think he simplifies it too much. For example, when he was talking about specialists, he used a description which I found interesting, because I would never think of a specialist in this way, but he described them as super loyal, muscular, but dull-brained illiterates. And it was a little funny, but in a sense, I mean, if you think of a specialist in that way, yes, it would make sense. But most specialists are not that. In the real world, it's actually a combination. So the point that he's trying to put forth is that we need people who think in terms of system one and who think in terms of a comprehensivist way, which I would say is a system one and system two combined way of thinking, versus people who only think in one mode of thinking. And that's a difficult concept to portray in a story. So, maybe that's why he took the simpler approach of explaining it this way. But I think that he's really talking about, thinking in both senses. The other part that I found very interesting is that,
Sanjay, do you mind? I just want to just highlight what you're saying. So I think this is a core part of it, of being able to go between system one and system two. And the other people are mostly system one most of the time. They do, while training, they use system two to do that. But after having done that, and I think he also, I mean, just to be fair to Bucky, he talks about these with the muscular people as the ship people, because where they're trying to protect the secrets. But on the land, he talks about developing like this entire kind of education system where people are kind of learn to be like accountants and something like that. So it's like he has a little bit more complex thing. But I think I really like your point about the fact that the sea traders are able to go between these two systems, system one, system two. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt, but go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree. I agree that Bucky understood this at a much deeper level, but the story is presented because it's presented for the general population, for everybody, and many people may not understand the complexity. So, I mean, in the story, if you read it, you do see that he discusses specialization in many different ways, and that's the reason. That's exactly as you said, because specialization actually involves much more than just muscular illiterates, as in this section you talked about. He did transform the definition of it later. I think he also talked about anticipatory design scientist, and this is where we get into his idea of system-wide thinking and systemic thinking, because he's combining, and these anticipatory design scientist is the term he uses for the other term of general pirate, a great pirate, or a sea master. These are all synonyms of the same idea that he's talking about, of a comprehensivist person who uses system one, system two together. And when we look at this anticipatory design scientist, what he's talking about is the person who anticipates, which means that they try to think about the possibilities of things that can happen, of things that we can propose. We can anticipate the future. We can anticipate new ideas, explore new knowledge. So that idea of anticipatory skills is very important. Then he talks about design, and design is really where you're implementing. You have not only ideas, but you actually implement them. You take action in them, and you come up with prototypes, or you come up with real world examples that can be tested and then used. And then the third idea in this is scientist. So a scientist is someone who theorizes. Again, they're coming up with new knowledge. They're synthesizing existing knowledge, but in new ways, similar to what you said about the trader does. So a scientist also, what they're doing is they're also predicting. They're looking at the theories that we have that they come up with, and to test whether those theories are correct, we see, can it predict what will happen in the future? Can it predict what will happen in an experiment? And so you make a prediction, and you run the experiment, and you see if your prediction is correct, and that gives you an idea whether your theory is correct. So he's looking at a very broad set of skills that together are necessary in people to navigate this world, this complex world that we're in.
Excellent, Sanjay. I want to follow up on this point about anticipatory. I like this term that is there, like when their ship comes in. See, the thing is that a trader is taking enormous amount of risk when they're trying, going, sending a ship or going on a ship. There are storms. So it's maybe that it doesn't come in. Maybe it does not even find what it is looking for. Maybe whatever they found is of no value at all, it turns out. So you have to kind of make predictions of where you need to go and how you need to get there. And you make all these detailed predictions. There is a chance of failure everywhere. And if you succeed in those predictions, then your ship comes in, and then you're better off. So I think it captures the kind of the essence of actually rational thinking, of saying, this is my best prediction. This is what I expect. based on everything I know, and then taking the action and then evaluating the result.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sanjay. Next up is Glenn. Glenn, go ahead. What are your thoughts about these two sections?
Thank you. Well, this is very encouraging for me because I'm getting back into Bucky, and when I read it, it was 50 years ago or so, and now I'm wondering how Bucky would write about this right now. What would he write about these two chapters differently than what he wrote here? When I do agree that he was telling the story, and at the time I didn't see it that way. I was just absorbing the information and trying to get through to where he was leading us. And I think we'll find that as we go into the book, he's leading us to the concept of generalized principles, comprehensiveness. And I never felt that he was trying to deny specialization, but putting it in the context of the big picture. And so I think that's really important. Sometimes we think, you just need a specialization, even in your own life. And his example of the human activities versus the animal kingdom, if that's the way he did it, I think is a good one for us to sort of meditate on. I really like your concept of trader versus pirate. Mm-hmm. I think that it was once said to me that at the end of time, there'll be two creatures left, cockroaches and traders. And why? Because the traders will be able to figure out where they got to get, what they need to get, where to go and get the supply. And that is kind of what he implies here, is that these traders, or as he calls them, maybe pirates, are going out and getting what's available in the world and bringing it to where they can make a market for it. And so I wonder now, in the context of where we are, I also thought in terms of the, what are the resources that we're getting besides the normal ones that, feed us and protect us? This whole trading of data is something that I personally need to think about deeper. And in reading these first two chapters, it made me think, well, we really need to be aware of the data that we're either providing or participating in, because people are mining it, making use of it. And I'll put in an advertisement for the Netflix movie Social Dilemma.
Okay, let's keep focused mostly on this book, because we will look at implications of it systematically. Because during this is the initial section, what we're trying to do is that we're trying to kind of put things on the table for everybody. Right. So which is kind of the core of his thought. I mean, I like very much your point about specialization. I like, for example, he says, here we see, after describing what these great traders do to specialization, he concludes, here we see the specialization being greatly amplified under the supreme authority of the comprehensively visionary and brilliantly coordinated venturer. So right. What it does is that it's actually the amount of specialized work goes through the roof. As soon as, as people with greater comprehensivist vision, or people who can do more integration with, when they come on the scene, they actually make possible a lot more a tremendously expanded version of specialization. And the value that the specialization produces also goes through the roof, because now for doing the same thing, there is a much larger market for it. Thanks to the fact that the traders have found the market, or it's the same action that the specialist was doing now is able to result in much greater, range of products, variety of products, the value of products. So in this way, it's the comprehensivists raise the value of the specialist. Thank you. Mike, Glenn, would you like to add anything more?
Well, the only thing I would like to is people refer to the end of his paragraph, or last paragraph on the first chapter, where he talks about what's going to happen happen if we don't do these things in the 21st century, and we're in the 21st
let's get to
century now,
let's get
and
to the
I
future
think we're
things also
seeing
later.
the effects of some of this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But let's do what I'm doing is that we kind of go through the books very systematically. What I want to do is that I want to just lay out the differences now between kind of specialization and the comprehensivist approach.
Okay.
Let all of that sink, let everybody get on the page, because it's very difficult to apply things to the 21st century. And I would rather, build all of this up over the next 3 or 4 things, and then we will deal with those topics. I think
I wasn't
everybody will
apply going forward. I was just wondering how people felt when they read that last paragraph on that first chapter.
Sure. Next up is Mike. Mike, go ahead.
Okay. When I read this book also a long time ago, probably not 50 years ago, but for 10 years is a long time too. I view this as a model for society. And if you accept his assumptions and his theories, it's a total solution. It is a bit of a heuristic, and I'm used to heuristics. If I wanted to compute agricultural calculations for the commodities market, I might assume a spherical pig, and then do my calculations based on that spherical pig, and it would work. And he's defined a society, and I go back to another book that I read that defined the society, and he came up with a statement, that guy came up with a statement of what you see depends on your point of view. And that guy was Plato, and he wrote Plato's Republic and Plato's Dialogues and a few other things, and the allegory of the cave, from where what you see depends on your point of view. So I've decided that Buckminster Fuller is operating from the point of view of a turquoise meme, the blue marble meme. It's an elegantly balanced system of interlocking forces, and if you can ever understand that force, that system, you can design a perfect economy. And I need to understand that system. It's a worthwhile system. Adam Smith also defined his system. Karl Marx defined his system. And the guy named Ken Wilber defined his system. And Ray Dalio defined his system. And I'm trying to understand all those simultaneously. And I realize I can't understand them all to the necessary precision. And so instead of coming up with either generalists or specialists, you have to learn how teams of people work and what you're going to do with all these people who are going to be outside the system, who are burning down New York City and Kenosha, Wisconsin. And that's also needs to be entered into the equation. So the equation is a multidimensional, nonlinear system that needs to be designed, and we can do it. I looked up, there's another world, the yellow meme.
Wait, Mike, let's not go too far away from the text. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to say, what did you get from the first 2 sections? What are your thoughts about it?
I got that it is a tautology, a simplification, and if you accept his assumptions, it will work, and we could design a society if we get everybody to sign into it that operates on his assumptions. Okay. And I'm going to try, I guess at the conclusion of today's session, we will have come up with the rules of the road for how that society needs to operate.
No, I don't think so. I think people have been trying to do that for since civilization began, or probably before that. I don't think we're going to be able to do that by the end of this meetup. I don't think so.
Well,
But
except for we need to, assuming everybody's going to buy into the assumptions, and then we'll have the rules.
sorry, you can't make such assumptions, Mike. It's too speculative. Let's go back. I'm going to open it up to questions. Folks, we have got the following rules for questions. The rule number 1, type exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom to ask questions. Here what you're trying to do now is to just clarify clarify what was said in section 1 or section 2. So any kind of clarificatory questions, try to keep your comments very brief. And then we're going to do breakout rooms. And then after the breakout rooms, we'll have more chance to share. All right. So, so questions. The first one up is Eileen. Eileen, go ahead.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with the terms system 1 and 2.
Sure.
So
sure. Yeah, these are the terms of Daniel Kahneman in the book, which he popularized it. I mean, these are very old terms, but Daniel Kahneman popularized it in the book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which I recommend very highly. It's basically system 1 is our kind of emotional automatic system, which is very quick, which summarizes all of our kind of past experience and produces an immediate reaction to something. Whereas system 2 is our thinking, rational, critical system, which requires effort to deliberately go through and check things against objective reality. So that's the basic distinction. So folks, go ahead and ask. You can ask questions by typing a exclamation mark in Zoom. Okay. If anybody has read now again, this is an invitation for people who have read chapter section 1 and 2. If you want to comment for 2 minutes, you're welcome to do that at this stage. Anybody? Nobody. This is very unusual. Normally we have many people. Let's see what's going on. Okay, Joel, go ahead. Joel.
Thanks, Shrikant. I just have a very brief comment.
Sure.
I think your term trader and Bucky's term pirate are both misnomers. And I think what we're really talking about is risk takers. And if we believe Jordan Peterson's theory, and I at least ascribe to it in this respect, risk is not something that people take on willingly or with enthusiasm. Some people are forced into it. I'm not familiar with the situation of the traders in India, but I know that the Jews were barred from other forms of transactions in Europe for a millennium and became the traders. So I think, and even now people seem to spew out the word capitalist with some venom in their voice. And I think the truth is these people are taking risks, and risk is a form of work, not just hewing lumber or painting walls.
Excellent point. Excellent point. And I think a lot of the trading, for example, the traders in India took to trading because their farms were dry. They did not have water. So in order to survive, they had to take the risk so that's kind of the history of trading. And absolutely excellent point. And risk is the heart of the whole. Like risk is connected with any kind of long distance trade, any kind of operation going outside of the comfort zone, outside of the familiar. All right. Give me just a second here. So what I'm going to do is we are going to go ahead and discuss this in breakout rooms.